Right. So I'll also add another layer to this because I think a lot of the issue is also a matter of courage. It's the problem that parents don't have the courage to say that, look, I think the traditional system is not working out for my kid. Do they have the courage to accept that? That's the first question. The second point is that even from the child's perspective, hey, I understand algebra is important, but the way that Mrs. David is teaching me is not working out for me. So who do I go and have this conversation with? And is this even the conversation that an adult will tolerate? That's the second question. Do they have the courage to have that conversation? And the third question is, do even faculty members, students, teachers, I mean not students, teachers and administrators have the courage to even see whether kids are actually satisfied with what they are learning, what they are applying, whether the curriculum that one of the big problems I have, right? Like when I was preparing for my 10th standard, I thought all schools taught the same curriculum. Okay. Then I got my ICSE booklet where I saw how many subjects were taught. And I was like, why did someone choose this for me? Right. So it's also a question about being rebellious productively and intellectually, where you are willing to be open minded about the things that you want to explore and very clear about things that I don't enjoy. So, do we have a vacuum in this sort of a conversation about courage? And how do we even encourage parents, administrators, and children to have very brutally honest conversations, whether things are working out for them or not working out? Because, like you said, if we want a future occupied by learning machines and not machine learning, honesty is going to be a very, very critical component of it.
I think you've summarized it very well. And in fact, the way you've summarized it actually tells you where the problem lies. It's a wicked problem. It's not a problem which can be solved either at the level of the child or at the level of the family or at the level of the parents or at the level of the school or at the level of this thing, because there's so many moving parts. I think you're absolutely right. The biggest problem, obviously, if you look at a child, if you look at a baby, for example, the baby is great at getting its own way. Imagine you have a 6 kilogram old baby who can manipulate a 60 kilogram adult just by crying or just by smiling or anything else. They get their way. There's no question about it. It's only afterwards that they start losing some of the skill sets, especially when they start being forced to conform when they go to school. So I think we need to have this clear demarcation. Preschool, kids are brilliant. Schooling, they go down, and by the time they reach college they've gone down completely. So first, let's acknowledge the fact, and this has been proven multiple times, that traditional schooling is harmful for kids. The great books on weapons of mass destruction, and I think schooling definitely is doing that. But the problem is, because we are all products of schooling ourselves, we've been so deeply brainwashed by the schooling system that we refuse to acknowledge that elephant in the room. And there is often a sense of helplessness. What can I do? I agree school is terrible, but what other choice do I have? Or, everyone else sends their kids to school, or even the Ambanis send their kids to school. So, of course, I need to send my kid. So I think part of the problem with schooling is the conformity, which means by the time you become a parent, you're so used to herd mentality, following the crowd, doing what the rest of it doing, is that you refuse to use your brain. So I think that's a lot of the problems. And therefore, this problem starts compounding itself and it starts becoming worse generation to generation. Now, let's be honest. What choices did my parents have? None. All the knowledge was locked up in schools. You had to go to a school library or a bookstore if you want to read. You had to go to a teacher. There really weren't any other options. That's no longer true today. That's the point. You cannot keep on using a system which was devised 200 years ago in order to create soldiers for the army and clerks for the bureaucracy in this particular day and age. It makes absolutely no sense. But because parents have been so used to doing what they've been told to do, they refuse to rock the boat, which means a number of parents who have the courage to do that, and you're using the word courage, and I'm really happy that you're doing that. The ones who are willing to homeschool, the ones who are willing to consider alternative education, is just a handful. The tragedy is that even if you know your kid is miserable in school, your kid is getting bullied, your kid is getting left behind, your kid is failing, your kid is learning, your kid gets stomach cramps in the morning because he doesn't want to go to school, he gets a headache when he comes back because the teacher called him an idiot, he can't finish his homework, he doesn't understand, he hates school, he hates his friends, he hates this thing. Part of the problem is, as parents, we forget. We kind of only selectively remember all our friends. about how our school days were the best days of our life. No responsibility, nothing. You just partied all day long and just had fun and played games. Your mind plays games with you and you forget about the fact that you had a teacher who hated your guts. You had teachers whose guts you hated. You had bullies who would bully you. You hated having to come back to class with a 5 on 10 and where your mom said, "What are you doing? Why are you such an idiot?" Or you hated having to do your homework. There's just so many things and we conveniently forget those unhappy memories. And when our kid comes back and tells us those, we blame the kid. We say, "You're the idiot. You're not working hard. You're not motivated. How come you're the only one who has a problem in class? How come everyone else is doing extremely well? You're lazy. You're unmotivated. It's your fault." It's not kids who are failing. It's the schools who are failing our kids. The trouble is we're so obsessed with the toppers, with the guys who get the high marks, that we forget the fact that our schools are letting the huge majority of students completely down. We're not tapping into their potential. So to your point, parents don't have the courage and they definitely don't want to rock the boat, because if you tell your teacher, "Hey, I think you're a crappy teacher," they're so scared because the kid is so vulnerable that the teacher will then take out the kunness on the kid and the kid will do even worse. That they tell the kid, "What can we do? I have a terrible boss at work, but I put up with my boss. So you have a terrible teacher in school, you learn to put up with your teacher. This is the way real life is. You better get used to all these compromises because, it's not going to be a bed of roses." So therefore you start compromising, you start forcing your kid to compromise. So where is the pressure on teachers to improve? If everyone started walking out of the class, trust me, I think things would be changed very dramatically. But that's not going to happen because there's a schools are actually designed to keep kids out. You're designed to create all these little enclaves of privilege where, I'm only going to take 100 students, and unless you get a sifarish from a prime minister or unless you get a letter from the chief minister, I'm not even going to let you get. So the parents are spending all their time and energy on pushing their kids into getting into the most desirable school, irrespective of the fact that the teachers are the worst and the school doesn't care. All these fancy schools treat parents like shit. Pardon my French, but they disrespect parents. They kind of think parents are idiots. They don't understand anything. And I mean, if tomorrow the child sees that the teacher is dissing the parent and disrespecting the parent, think about what the second order consequences of that are going to be. And I think schools are actually driving a huge wedge between the parent and the child because there's so much peer pressure, there's so much things going on. The child is spending the best part of his day in school, as a result of which he gets exposed to influences which the parent is completely powerless to counteract. And what's even worse is, in one sense, parents have given up. Their whole approach is, I'm an idiot. What do I understand? I don't remember calculus or trigonometry. All these teachers are B.Eds and in IB schools, so they're highly qualified and they're experts at teaching all this stuff. So let them do their job. And what the hell am I paying 5 lakhs a year from? And what do I understand about this? So I did my job. Made sure my kid got into the best possible school. I'm paying the fees on a regular basis. And if they're not happy with the school, what do? They send the kid to a tuition class. Now, if you can afford an expensive tuition class, then you get the tutor to come home and teach. But what message are you giving your kid? You're an idiot. You're never going to be able to learn for yourself. We need to spoon feed you. We need to provide you with someone who's smarter, wiser, more intelligent than you, who will teach you what you need to learn. And that's such a broken model. Because effectively, when you have a classroom size of 30 kids or 20 kids or 40 kids or whatever it is, we're forced to use a one size fits all. And the reality is the teacher's interests are not aligned with the child's interest. End of the story. Teachers love the toppers. Obviously, everyone loves the toppers. But what happens to the rest of the batch? They either push them off or say this kid's never going to do well. They write the kid off. Imagine the harm which you're causing a child's self-esteem, that child's self-confidence, when that child is 8-year-old and so vulnerable. And when a grown-up adult whom that child looks up to and says, "You're an idiot, you're a C grader, you're never going to do well in life, you're never going to understand mathematics, or this is just way beyond you." And they especially do that for girls. What kind of messaging are we providing? And sadly, parents are accepting these messages, as a result of which you're damaging that child's self-confidence, self-esteem, enjoyment, everything. As a result of which, these kids then they start getting so turned off that by the time they became teenagers, they rebel. And especially once they get a chance to go to college, that's the time when they start experimenting, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's smoking, whether it's sex. And then all these parents say, "What happened to my sweet little child? He used to be such a darling and he did everything, and now he's gone and he's this guy I don't even recognize." But that's because you abandoned your child when your child needed you and needed to be protected when your child was 6 and 7 and 8 and needed to be sheltered. And you needed to tell him at that point, "I'm your parent. I have skin in the game. I will make sure that you enjoy your learning process. I will help you to learn how to learn." And that time you just abandoned him to all these teachers who really didn't care. So by the time he's 12, 14, he cares more about his peers and his friends, and he's more interested in impressing them rather than you. So it's because you let your kid down, because you didn't do a good job with parenting, because you expected a school to do that job for you. You effectively outsource the most important thing you could possibly give your child, which is a happy childhood, by locking him up in the school. And even worse, forcing him to do homework. And then even worse, forcing him to send him to tuition classes. Where did he ever have time to play? Where did he ever have time to explore what his interests were? And you know what? You have all these extracurricular activities, and even those are forced down a kid's throat. No, you have to learn Bharatnatyam. No, you have to learn coding. No, you have to do this. I mean, what sense does it make? Why can't we just leave these kids alone? And why can't we just accept the fact that just because they're smaller than us doesn't mean that they're not the experts on themselves? They are. And it's by forcing them to do things they don't want to do. That's when the problems start occurring. Which is why there's this huge movement about whether you call it unschooling, whether you call it unlearning, whether you call it relearning. But sadly, it's only a very, very small minority. And, there's this huge thing about cognitive dissonance. No, what I'm doing is right. Even if people will accept the fact that the kid is not happy in school, they will rarely have the courage to do what is the logical next step, which is pull their kid out of school. Because they said, what's the guarantee that the second school will be any better? Or this is the school which has the best reputation, or this is the school which has the fanciest kids, or whatever else it is, or the IB board or anything else. If I pull my kid out of school, the next school may be even worse. So it's like the known devil is better than anything else. And there are any number of excuses parents will come up with. Oh, but I'm hard at work. I work all day. Isn't it enough that I pay my the school fees and my college fees? And am I supposed to do anything else? So by the time the parents come back from work, they're so tired that they're sitting on a couch watching TV or watching their mobile. And then they expect their kid to do their homework. Now just imagine what kind of role model you're setting your kid. You're effectively saying, you're so tired. So kid is saying, what the hell? I'm equally tired. I'm more tired. I had to do things which I didn't want to do. You goofed off half your working day. You spent a coffee break and a tea break and you were gossiping and you were, whatever else you wanted to do. I didn't have a choice with any of these things at all. And now you're continuing to force me to do things I don't want to do. As a result of which, kids are very good at sensing hypocrisy. And they're very, very clear that a lot of parents have basically abandoned them to their own fate. And lots of them are resenting it. So to your point, this is all the problems which I've described. So the problems occur both from the kid, because the kid feels completely trapped. Who does he turn to? If your kid is lucky and has a grandparent who happens to be living in the family, I think that's great, because often grandparents have a little more maturity and wisdom and say, leave him alone. Why are you keeping on hassling him? Or I remember when you were in the 7th standard, you failed all your exams and you still turned out okay. So why are you giving him such a hard time about failing his exams? But anyway, so I think that's the parent piece, the kid piece. And let's look at the teachers, for example. Teachers have very little autonomy. That's the reality. They don't command any respect. People diss them all the time. As a result of which, the ability of the teacher, even a caring teacher, to change a kid's fate is very limited, because they're so forced to doing clerical activities, taking attendance, making sure the syllabus gets completed, that they really don't have any opportunity to allow the kid to thrive. As a result of which, most teachers feel trapped. Lots of the best teachers actually burn out within 2 or 3 years, and they hate what the schooling system is doing to the kids. And they said, you know what, I can't take this anymore. And therefore, they step out and they look for alternative opportunities. So, to your point, it's a systemic problem. It's not the child to blame, it's not the parent to blame, it's not the school to blame. And systemic problems are wicked problems. So they're very hard to solve. Which is not to say that solutions aren't available. People have looked at alternative solutions for many, many years. And that's some of the stuff which I'm experimenting with, which is where I wear my social entrepreneurship hat.